There we go. It's March 9th, 1992. I did all my drinking in this area, and what's interesting is this is the scene of the crime. This is the exact place I went to my first meeting, and I'll never forget that morning. But I'll get to that, I guess. I'm gonna go back. So my story is a little bit of it's sort of like an 8mm film of blackouts that kind of gets fragmented together. So bear with me. The chronological design of it is going to be horrible, but the what it was like and what happened and what it's like now, I hopefully will identify that during the course of my story. Feel free to throw things up here if you're not getting what you need. But so my I was the youngest of 6 kids. My life started in just outside of Detroit, Michigan, and Birmingham, Michigan. So I always like to consider myself from Detroit because that means you're a little bit tougher than if you say you're from Birmingham. Okay, so I kind of like to carry that attitude with me, and so my father was he was a businessman. My mom was a house mom, and had 3 older brothers and 2 older sisters. One of them is here, and we're the sole survivors of this family. And there's probably a movie in there, and who knows, maybe another 12-step program in and out somewhere along the way. Definitely a lot of interesting things growing up Catholic in the suburbs of Detroit. You know, my parents back in those days, I guess, we drank out of the hose. We didn't wear helmets. All those things were pretty prevalent back then. We didn't worry about things. And having 3 older brothers meant that you were subjected to a lot of torture and, atomic wedgies or whatever. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I mean, I was really a good kid all the way up until, I guess, the first time I used, and my story doesn't start with alcohol, but it certainly ended with it. And so I'll be respectful to everyone, and I understand all of the stuff that goes along with that. But really, I think that the very first time, that I was, I was telling on my brothers for smoking pot in the basement. So, and then my dad would go down there and beat the crap out of them, and then they would come and beat the crap out of me. So we decided to work out a deal where I would just get high with them. So that worked out well. And I stopped getting beating. Well, the beatings didn't stop, but the beatings for that stopped. And, I don't know. I think from the very first moment, it wouldn't have mattered where I got my exposure from it. I think I'm just wired that way. It doesn't matter what makes me feel good, I abuse. And I've found that out, that I'm powerless over so many more things than just alcohol. But alcohol was a cheap motivator in getting me to the solution that I have today. So I'm grateful for that. Grew up in the Detroit area. My poor parents, I feel bad for them, but every one of us we weren't good kids, in my estimation. And, to see all the pain and suffering that I caused my parents, my dad finally made the decision. He said, well, we got to get out of Detroit area. We got to go. We're going to go. When we were vacationing down here at the time, and he's like, well, I'm going to move the kids down to Sanibel Island. And that will help, maybe they won't all be drug addicts and alcoholics. And, well, that didn't work out too well. So, interesting thing is wherever you go, there you are, and our family moved down there, and, and I've been credited for starting, the Sanibel Mafia, which is sort of a running joke when I tell my story. But the reality is there wasn't any crime on the island until our family moved there. So that's when the crime started. It's kind of funny, actually. But, part of my, and going back a little bit, from the very first moment, from going and being a straight A student to the very first time that I uh, entered into the world of substance. Um, I by the sixth grade, so the third grade is when I started. Okay, by the sixth grade, I was kicked out of school. I was already a juvenile delinquent. I had vandalized the school. I was in trouble. I didn't want to follow. I didn't want to follow any authority. Um, I wasn't going to listen to anything anybody told me, and I just didn't care really. To be honest with you, you know, I was fighting with everybody at school. It just didn't matter. And so when we moved to Florida, it was even worse because now you take me away from at least some of my creature comforts and people that I know and whatever, and you put me on Sanibel Island, which is, I guess some people want to, that's like a dream of theirs to move there. It's not mine. Not when you're 13 years old. It's like, this is purgatory. Might as well have been Alcatraz as far as I was concerned. And, I don't think you should know every shell on the island when you're that age. So luckily I had a good work ethic. My father was pretty much, even though we were, I guess, in a good place in society, my father was a child of a Depression era. So nothing was given to you. You had to work for it. You had to earn it. It was, a check and balances type thing. So I had developed a good work ethic. And, I started working at a restaurant on the island, a place called F&B Oyster Company. And, I would get off the school bus and I would wash dishes after school. That's what I did. And when I would go to school on the school bus, I wouldn't even go to the school. Okay. I would just hang out and go to the woods with some buddies or skip, so eventually they just asked me to leave. They didn't kick me out of school. They said it would probably bode well for your records if you just quit. So I was 15 years old, I think, when this happened. And so, I never forget my father saying to me, it was like the darkest day of his life because I was like the last hope of all the kids that was even going to get a degree at this point and, or even graduate from high school. I think my brother Keith did. And I think my sister Lisa did, but, none of the rest of us did. And it didn't matter. I mean, I was blacking out, so I don't remember much from those. So the facts are whatever I think they are, from that point. So it was definitely a challenge, to be on this island and I ended up moving out when I was 15. So what happened was, as I moved in with my brothers, and somehow, back in then, I think my parents were just had enough. Like they needed a break. So when I moved out, it was kind of probably a relief for them. And it wouldn't have mattered if they had put me in. They used to tuck us in at night, and we would climb out the window as soon as the door. It just didn't matter. That was happening all the time. They would say, "Well, we put them to bed, and then we go in there, and they're gone." Of course, the cops are on the phone saying, "Hey, we got your kids down here." And it was always one or the other one of us. You know what I mean? Somebody was always going. And so why I remember getting involved in this. I had some people over and that we were having a party and it was late and we ran out of booze. And so I decided to go into the Lighthouse restaurant and borrow some stuff from them at like 2:00 in the morning. And so we broke in and I fired up the grills and cooked some burgers and and whatever. And we went back to the house, stole a bunch of stuff and got back to the house. And, we woke up the next morning to somebody knocking on the door. Well, it was the police, the Sanibel police, a very fine organization, by the way. And they want to know if we saw anything. Somebody broke into the restaurant. Of course, we have no idea what. And so they started bringing one of us out at a time that were in the house. We were all underage, probably shouldn't be unsupervised. And one of the people that we were harboring, I guess you would call it, ratted us out. And I had to go to jail for that. And I had to go through probation. And I remember going into jail and being in solitary confinement and the door shutting and that whole feeling, at that moment. And, it was, in some respects, I was such a punk that it was almost a badge of honor. Like that was cool. You know what I mean? And And that's just where my head was at that time in my life. Um, so I remember being court ordered to go back and live with my parents. And by this time, they moved off of Sanibel Island, maybe from embarrassment. Um, and they were down in Cinnamon Cove over here. And I wasn't allowed to go back to Sanibel Island. That was part of my probation. I couldn't go back, so I was kicked off of Sanibel Island. So um, it's definitely a crazy story, but it gets better. It does get better eventually. So, and I was working at the so in my infinite wisdom, I decided to, as had a career in the food industry, I started working at the Lani Kai, which it's like putting that just was like jet fuel. So I worked there, and I worked at a lot of different places, but this was sort of my, my training. And the reality is I had a lot of friends. I was the life of the party. I wasn't just a juvenile delinquent, but I had some values. Um, and what really ended up happening is when I look back on it, when I come home here, almost, excuse me, I don't have anybody that I remember or know that I grew up with. They're all dead, and that's the crew that I ran with. And it's really sad. I know there's one friend of mine that still is here. He was my roommate. He was a guy with dreadlocks, and we were beach rats. There was a term for us. They were called beach rats, and we would ride around on our beach cruisers, and we'd work in the restaurants. We'd make, just live to party is all we did, and so this obviously everyone's got a great drunk log. This is sort of mine, and um, I'm trying to remember like where the bottom finally hit. But I remember it just wasn't working anymore. And I had a girlfriend that overdosed on. I was living with a girl, and she had OD'd, and I remember calling the paramedics, and this is the love of my life. I love this girl, and so the paramedics get her, they revive her, take her to the hospital. I dig the stuff out of the garbage can, finish it, and then go to the hospital. This was the guy that I was. And so much shame and guilt for that moment in my life. Even, when I talk about it today, because it was an amends I could never make, so I've tried, and it probably would have had bad motives if I made the amends anyway. So the best thing that ever happened was that she never got to see me again, really. And so I'm grateful for that. I have no idea how she ended up. I know that she had heart conditions after that, but that was just, and some of the other things that were going on at this time in my life, there was some, if people remember back then, there was a lot of stuff, a gentleman that ended up blowing up the DEA office down here, and I was kind of like working around him a little bit, and some of my friends got murdered, and so it was a point, where I needed to try to figure out how to escape. And really, it was like survival mode kicked in, and and I remember getting evicted from the apartment I was living in. Of course, this is what happens, and I moved back home, and I look at my kids, and I'm like, I hope they don't boomerang. But then I'm like, God only knows the boomerang, and I did. I came with like lots of baggage when I went back home. And I just remember my parents being like, they did not know what to do with me. I was so far gone. And so I remember writing out my own will and all this stuff, and trying to detox myself. And my mom and dad were just beside themselves with worry. And there was a lot of bad things happening on the beach at the time. People were, there was a lot of vans with antennas on top of them running around and all that kind of stuff. And so I tried to escape, and I was just overwhelmed with fear. And I went, and my sister Lisa, excuse me. I've told this story a few times, but it never gets any easier. I was going to stay on the non-dark side of my story. I'll get there, I guess. But anyway, my sister Lisa picks me up and takes me to her house, and somehow I get locked out of their house because I need to go out and smoke, and they want the alarm system on. Because I've convinced everyone that they're definitely coming for me, whoever they are, they're coming. And make a long story short, I end up in the David Lawrence Crisis Center, and beaten. I was beaten with a golf club and just totally wrecked. And so I remember, and this is the 8mm stuff. I just remember being in there and having and trying to negotiate with them. I was trying to get a sailboat in the Bahamas, actually. And I was trying to get into the witness protection program. That's how delusional I was. So they said, well, I'll tell you what, we're not going to give you the sailboat in the Bahamas, but we will give you is a 6-month stay in a state institution, or a 28-day treatment center. So I took the treatment center. This is my first of 7. And to be honest with you, it was it was just a drying out. I was about, I don't know, I blamed a lot of my early trials and tribulations on trauma that I experienced. I blamed it on a lot of things. And, and it was easy to say that I had a nervous breakdown. It was easy to say all these other reasons were the reason that I did what I did. But the truth of the matter is, once my girl had OD'd and that, I stopped drugs. Like, that was it. And I just went to drinking. And it was forget it, man. It was like, I couldn't put anything together. My life was so completely unmanageable from that point. And so I get to my 7th. Yeah, I guess it's my 7th rehab. And the gentleman knows me there. I have like a punch card. Or frequent flyer, I get a free meal or something. So I get there and the guy's looking at me. I call him the wizard because he was just a short English guy who smoked a lot of cigarettes and drank a lot of coffee. But he knew how to talk to me. He knew how to reach me. And he was like, so I'm there and they're dropping me off. It's like a ritual of how they bring me to treatment and how that went. And my dad would say, well, son, you don't pull up to a red light and quit. What do? You stop. And he said, well, you have to stop. And I was like, so my dad thought he was giving me these pearls of wisdom, and but God bless him because he stayed by my side I don't even know. There's no way I would have had the patience to do what he did as a parent. And maybe there could be something said that maybe he should have done more as a parent, but I take full responsibility, for all of that. And it's just a better way for me to live. And so anyway, the guy says to me, he says, listen, he says, you're a mess. I was like 119 pounds. I was bleeding out of places you shouldn't be bleeding out of. And he's like, you're going to die. And he goes, I'll tell you what. He goes, why don't you write your eulogy tonight and we will have your funeral tomorrow? I was like, so being schizophrenic and paranoid and everything else that I was because of all the things I did to myself, that freaked me out. And I started crying and I asked him, what do I do for help? What do I do? And he goes, you better ask God to help you. So at that moment, I went through the whole thing but I got on my knees and I asked God to take this thing from me and it worked. This was, and I think there's a window of opportunity because if it would have been an hour or two later, a day later, I would have talked myself back into being okay. And I would have been running again. So I get up, I go to my funeral. It's pretty dramatic. The girls are crying, which is important for me. And we burned it. We burned my eulogy. And the eulogy was simple. It was like I never became anything that I wanted to be at this point in my life. What was I? A cook, and a bad son. And basically, when I was going into this rehab, I was actually under the impression that I was becoming a father. So I have to give some credit to this kid for getting me sober because it made me realize I had to get my shit together. So I guess a couple years later, I'm in, I'm like super crafty at rehab. I've spent a couple years of my life in recovery. And my dad's like, hey, we got this kid of yours has got red hair. He said, we might need to get a paternity test on this one. So it turns out a couple years later, it's not even my kid. So I was like, I was, obviously very upset but grateful. And thank God I had a sponsor that pointed out to me that, I was able to do things that I wouldn't have done otherwise. That kid saved my life. So kind of a strange little twist to my story, but I was so internally grateful for it because I was paying child support. I mean, she was bringing the kid around to the parents because my parents had money, and it was this whole manipulation thing. And just one more little thing in the gumbo for my parents to have to deal with, and they just, and they dealt with it no problem, and that was pretty awesome. So, all right, now we're gonna get to the fun stuff. Okay, I'm sorry if I bummed anybody out. But so in recovery, what was amazing is the amount how successful we can be when we want to be. Like, you take that same energy that I had to do all the things I was doing, and you put that into a sober lifestyle, and I just propelled myself like a rocket. And so like at 2.5 years, I finally got my first apartment, got my GED, went to college in Miami, had I did 2 years of college in 11 months, and got in an advanced program to become a chef. That's what I wanted to be my whole life. And went to Vegas, worked for Steve Wynn, did an apprenticeship at the Mirage, stayed there for 4 years, and worked this program like my life depended on it. Like nothing else mattered. And so for that, I am totally grateful for the amount of desperation that I have. And and as I'm talking about it, I'm like, I never really get this emotional, believe me. But it's kind of coming out right now for some reason. And so my life really changed dramatically from there. And it wasn't. I mean, well, anything was better than what I was doing. And it was pretty easy to have a good day. Like clean clothes and a car and a job. I mean, I was so grateful just to have those things because those are things that I took for granted. When you lose all those things and you lose everything that you care about over and over again and you just keep starting over, that gave me a real basis of gratitude. And today I'm still a winner, man, no matter what. If I didn't drink today, I may flip somebody off in the road or whatever. Yeah, I'm still a flawed human being. But if I'm not drinking today, I have an opportunity to make it right. You know what I mean? That's the thing that I really believe in wholeheartedly. Like that is the jet fuel for me. So my life, kind of fast forwarding here a little bit. So my life in recovery has been, one of, it starts out with service. It starts out with a commitment to building a foundation. I likened it to gathering supplies for a home that I have to live in. I'm gathering all this stuff, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do and where I want to go in my life. And try to make the best choices that I can with this crazy guy that I have. I still have this crazy guy that I have to deal with. Just because I have all this other opportunity doesn't mean that I'm not a stable human being still. There's a lot of meat and potatoes that I have to follow, and still to this day, I had the committee working full time. I got a 2.5 hour drive to get here from Clearwater. And I'm like, okay. And, I'm already fantasizing about the group in the meeting. And I'm like, it could have been a little smaller, Lisa. You know what I mean? I didn't need to, but, so I'm already fantasizing and discussing it. And then I'm calling people, and then I'm talking to people and telling them what's going on. This is a certain actions of humility that has probably saved my ass. And I don't like to talk about humility because then you don't have it, right? So, but I will say that I I don't mind being transparent with who I am, and accepting responsibility for exactly who I am. So I ended up getting married to a girl in the program, Mr. and Mrs. AA. It was great. And having a real child who's never seen me drink, which is awesome. I had the best kid. But that marriage was not, it was a flawed marriage. And I probably, because of my times on the beach as a beach person, didn't develop any relationship skills. So I needed to hone those. And if I'm going to take responsibility for that, I guess I should, but I'd like to say that she was a little flawed too, but I'll leave that for another time. I, but so I was married for about 13, 14 years, stayed sober. She did not. And so we had to separate. And I tried to get her through a couple of rehabs. That wasn't to be. And, my parents stayed married their whole life. So that was an example that I had. Regardless of all the other examples I may have had in my home life, they stayed married. And so to me, there was, you kind of have to stick in there a little bit, maybe a little bit longer than I should have, and whatever, but I did. And, but we separated, and, I was able to, I'm married to this beautiful person today. She's just not in the program. And, we've been married, we celebrated 3 years. And so I'm on my upgrade wife. And she is, I'm so blessed and lucky though, because I found somebody that can, I really identify with. And I don't know, I guess I had a lot of training in life, wisdom. I had to acquire some wisdom in that field. And I feel like today I have a good relationship. And I also feel like that it's always going to be room for growth, and, as far as my, the sponsorship tree that I have is, I'm quite blessed. My first sponsor was Bud Murphy. I can say because he's passed. And his sponsor was Clarence Snyder, which is the home brewmeister in the book, the story number 3. And so a lot of my early recovery is really founded on studying the big book. The first one, 64, the gospel of what I believe in. And it's become something that I do it only out of the big book. When I sponsor guys, I only use the big book. It's everything else is to me a derivative, and it works however you find it, but it's simple, and it's the way that I was taught, and it's the way that I pass it on. And I have guys. I was at a meeting a few weeks ago that I go to somewhat, 'cause I don't live in Tampa anymore. He goes, and I was looking first. He goes, "You can have my seat. You're my grand sponsor." I'm like, I don't even know who this kid is, but I was like, this is cool. Um, I'm patting myself on the back, obviously. Um, but those are, and today I still go to 4 meetings a week. And for that, I find that to be, I was like a 2 meeting a week guy, and I had a really good routine, and I don't know. And when I moved, and, this storm that came in, it kind of rearranged things quite a bit in my life. And I know a lot of you guys are directly impacted here. You guys are ground zero, and I was sort of a storm, uh, a survivor, a victim, I guess you would call it. I was impacted, but not to a point where, I would come down here twice a week or 3 times a week for a long time after. And, but I was getting a hot shower. You know what I mean? I was coming in, and I was almost wanting to rub dirt on myself. Like I felt bad, and I couldn't sleep afterwards. I would come here and I would see all the pain, and then I would go home and I'd be like, and 24 hours would go by, like, I got to go back down there. I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, I showed up with like a weed whacker and some duct tape, like I don't know what to do, but I needed to be here to do something, and I felt so bad for everything that happened here. And then we had to spend a lot of time. We have some property and business on the beach that, um, that have been in the family, and they were destroyed. So it's been quite a journey to participate in the support of the rebuilding of that, and it's been quite an honor for me, um, to even have the opportunity to do that, really, because for one, I wasn't supposed to get this old. Okay, that just wasn't in the cards. I wasn't supposed to get old, but apparently I am getting old because I can tell you that's a whole nother thing, and staying sober. At some point, you're going to get old, which is fine. But I'm not moving to Sanibel. I don't care. And so we're rebuilding this stuff after the storm, and and I get involved in community stuff and charitable stuff, and it's a real honor, to take some of the skill sets that we're given in here and try to transfer those into other problems that you're experiencing. And am I perfect at it? No, I'm not. I'm so far from perfect. And in fact, every time I think I'm doing something great, I shouldn't even be thinking that. But it does have its blessings. But it's been so in the last couple of years. I've also, throughout my sobriety, I've had some health issues, as you can imagine, and some of the habits post sobriety. I mean, smoking and cigars. I mean, I inhaled 3 cigars a day for a long time. I was diagnosed with throat cancer. I've been so I beat that 10 years. I haven't had but now about a year and a half ago, I had a stroke, and I don't look like a stroke victim, right? So I don't get any of the sympathy from it. So, but what happened was I had a blocked artery going into my retina, and lost some vision in my one eye. So, but it's like it's just the screwing I get for the screwing I did. These are the things I did to myself. So today I think about what I eat. I think about what I'm doing. I have people that count on me, that depend on me to be, that person. And so I take that seriously. It's not it's really not about me. And, like today, coming here, when somebody asks me to speak, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to say, yeah. You know what I mean? It's just what you do. And I'm totally grateful for that. Really, excuse me. I recently started a podcast, sober podcast, and I don't really talk about it in meetings, but it is part of my current story and what I'm doing. And we've got like 8,500 followers. We've been downloaded in 15 countries, and so, but the guy that I'm doing it with he's like a couple years sober, and he's a radio personality and a talent. And he's the one that came up with the idea, and I'm like, let's do it. And it's really given me a lot of purpose, and we really focus on great success stories and living your best life. And and so for that, I'm grateful to try to capture that content and spit it out there in a way that honors all of this. And people are responding, and it's been fun. Am I good at it? I don't know. I don't even. I think that I'm doing a good thing. That's what motivates me. Um, you know, and and some of the other things in my life, like I'm really am totally blessed for sure. I'm going to be taking a yachting course, and I'm gonna learn to become a captain. Some of the things I've done in sobriety, I did a lot of sailboat racing. I've sailed the 7 seas. I've traveled to faraway lands, and didn't have to drink. You know, I can do anything and go anywhere. That's what I've learned. That I'm no longer a slave to this disease that controlled my life, and I don't even know how to pay it back. But I do know that I owe a debt to this, and to the fact that this is my very first meeting is crazy. This is the place where I came in, and basically I looked at those steps, and I looked at number 2. I said, maybe there's hope. Because that's the one step that I looked at. I'm like, that's a step. If this thing's going to work, it's going to have to start with step 2. Forget that other one and none of the other ones. But I was crazy, just so crazy. And I left the meeting that night, and I was like, I could probably drink like a gentleman. It's exactly what I thought. I went back and I was like, guys, I think we just need to drink less. And that wasn't the solution. And I don't know. I was a couple other things. So this week I was chairing a meeting, and the topic was on the Wright brothers getting to fly, and that the God idea works. Our ideas don't. The God idea does. And so I was kind of impressed by that, because this is like 100 years old, and they're freaked out about planes flying around. And I'm like, where do you get a load of Chat GPT? You know what I mean? Or where do you get a load of some of the stuff we're dealing with? Because this is like, and they were all freaked out at the time how fast technology was moving. And here we are in times where it's super light speed and things are changing and it's uncomfortable. There's a lot of things that can create fear right now. And one day at a time has never been a better time to have that. Just stand today, do what you can. I have to focus on some things based on realities. I have to have some forecasting and future planning, but for the most part, I like to stay in the day. And and I'm optimistic about change. I'm not gonna freak out about all the change anymore. And it used to just be something that I didn't like authority. I didn't like any kind of change. I like to control everything, and that doesn't work. And so how am I? You're not holding your phone up yet. Am I close?
No, I'm not holding the phone.
All right, all right. I'm winding down here. And so and the meeting itself was well received, and I think people in their personal lives. I started in this group. I'm sort of a newbie to the group, and of course, I may want to change some of the formats because it wasn't the way that I got sober. So I've ruffled a few feathers, but you know what? I think I realized that I just need to suit up and show up and be of service. I still go to the newcomer after the meeting. I still hand out my phone number, and I'm open to help anybody that I can. I just am so grateful that I'm even useful. I still forget. Like, I can get full of myself just like anybody, but man, just the fact that I can be useful to another human being is such a gift. And and who knows? And my son, I let him skin his knees up as a father. Who I basically was a single father for a portion of my life, and when she was unavailable, and we're rooting for her to get well. I'm not trying to be that ex-husband guy that's down on her. I really would like her to do well, but it's a challenge, and he's really more challenged with it than I am. He's emancipated from that situation, so I'm a little bit blessed. But he's becoming a fine young man, and in his frat house. Now the frat house was piles of beer cans or whatever he was living in, and I was a little concerned. But they made him the sentry of the fraternity, which means he is the guardian to make sure everyone stays safe. This was not, the guy that I was drinking with, that wouldn't have raised that kid. Okay, but the sober guy did. Regardless of his life, I can't control whether he drinks or doesn't drink. Those are things that are going to happen, and hopefully he's got some good teachers on what not to do, and then he follows that path. But I want him to go out and enjoy his life, and it feels like I feel really honored to stand next to him and see the man that he's become. You know, so anyway, I think I'm gonna shut her now with that. But thank you.